it. And not only, maybe they don't pay a price right now in the next election,
this was a
but
very
they could
grave
certainly
and
pay a
momentous
price in
step
terms of what they're doing
that we were forced to take today to move a contempt citation against the Attorney General of the United States. We did not relish doing this, but we have no choice. Attorney General Barr, having proved himself to be the personal attorney to President Trump rather than the Attorney General of the United States, by misleading the public as to the contents of the Mueller report twice, by not being truthful with Congress, has shown himself to be the personal attorney of the United States rather than the Attorney General. And now he has taken it a much greater step farther in turning the entire Department of Justice into an instrument of Trump personally, rather than an instrument of justice and a representative of the United States. By seeking to evade, to bar all subpoenas, and the President said it, that they will resist all subpoenas, not just with reference to the Mueller report or to the Russian attack on our democracy, but with reference to anything, to reference to the Department of Justice's turnaround on their position in court on the Affordable Care Act, to references to investigations of security clearances, to references to the decisions to tear babies away from their mothers at the borders, to everything. They are uniformly rejecting subpoenas from Congress. This means that they have decided to oppose the role of Congress as a coordinate branch of government representing the American people. They are stonewalling the American people from all information, and this cannot be. We cannot have a government where all the information is in the executive branch, where the American people and the Congress are stonewalled as to information that they need to make decisions and to know what's going on. So while this is stonewalling information with respect to the Russian attack on our democracy in 2016, with respect to the President's campaign cooperation with that attack, to the President's obstructions of justice in seeking to stop the investigation of that attack, it goes far broader than that. It's an attack on the ability of the American people to know what the executive branch is doing and to have responsible government. It is an attack on the essence of our democracy, and we must oppose this with every fiber of our being. And that's why we today referred a contempt citation to the House floor. The House will have to vote that contempt citation to begin the court battle. There can be no higher stakes than this attempt to arrogate all power to the executive branch away from Congress, and more important, away from the American people. We've talked for a long time about approaching a constitutional crisis. We are now in it. We are now in a constitutional crisis. Benjamin Franklin in 1787 was asked, when he exited the Constitutional Convention, "What type of government have you given us, sir?" And he said, by a woman who asked him the question, he said, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Now is the time of testing whether we can keep a republic or whether this republic is destined to change into a different, more tyrannical form of government, as other republics have over the centuries. We must resist this. This is far broader than Republican or Democratic or even the rights of Congress. This is whether we can put limits on the power of the president, any president, and then executive branch, and hold the president, any president, accountable. That's what is at stake here. We cannot flinch, and we will not flinch.
Mr. Mayor, if you're in a constitutional crisis, why are you resistant to moving forward with impeachment?
Well, I'm not going to talk about impeachment, but that may be the short answer is that may not be the best answer in this constitutional crisis. There are a lot of considerations for that, and that may not be the best answer for this constitutional crisis.
Well, I mean, if you're not thinking about impeachment right now, do you think this goes to the floor next week and then you move to court?
This will go to the floor rapidly. I don't know whether it's next week or not, but it'll be on the floor soon.
And how does that compare with, I know Democrats are looking are you guys going to balance that, prioritize what comes first?
Well, we'll see what happens. We are still planning to have Mr. McGahn appear before us, have Mr. Mueller appear before us. The president has made that more difficult by ordering Mueller not to appear and by ordering McGahn not to submit documents that we've subpoenaed. And by the way, these documents, the White House makes a nonsensical claim, and the Department of Justice this morning, for all these various documents, they say they're executive privilege. Most of them are not executive privilege. And remember something about executive privilege. It's not a blanket bar. Nixon, in the Nixon case, the tapes, you all remember or have read about the tapes. These were the most sensitive to executive privilege. They were private conversations between the president and his advisors, and the Supreme Court ruled 8-0 that the interests of the public in justice and in accountability outweighed the interests of the president in privacy, and ordered those tapes revealed. And of course, when the tapes were revealed, that led to Nixon's resignation. So, number one. Number two, executive privilege is designed to get candor by the president's advisors to advise him. Once that has gone public, once the president has said it's okay to share those conversations or that evidence or whatever with the Mueller investigation, with your private attorney, with whoever, once it's been published, there is no more privilege because it's done already. Everything we have requested, the unredacted part, all the material in the redacted parts of the Mueller report, all the material that we've requested in the various subpoenas, none of it is privileged because all of it, they waived the privilege by enabling it to go public to Mueller or to whoever. So it's a nonsense claim. We will win these court fights because the law is one-sided. And when the president or Attorney General Barr or anybody else cites executive privilege in these cases, they are not being honest. They're not being honest because there's no real claim at all.
Chairman Nadler, are we to perceive this as you say these are going to be court fights you will be fighting, as a civil contempt then? Is there going to be any criminal part of this or any inherent that we've heard about?
It'll probably be a civil contempt.
And why not go with inherent, as some of your colleagues have suggested? Because
well, I don't want to answer that question because I'm not sure we won't.
You're not sure you wouldn't go with inherent?
That's right.
Mr. Chairman, you said that the president has ordered Mueller not to testify. Are you referring to his tweet last week saying Mueller should not testify?
Yes.
And how has that made that harder? Has Mueller specifically told you that he doesn't feel he can testify?
No, but it obviously puts a lot of pressure on Mueller, and the discussions are ongoing.
How are the discussions? Are they breaking?
They're ongoing.
Are you going to go to court and ask the judge to unseal the grand jury material without the Justice Department?
Yes, we will. Now, in every prior case, the Attorney General has joined the Judiciary Committee, or I think sometimes other committees, but has joined Congress in asking for a grand jury material. In every case, all the major cases, that has been granted. The Attorney General, this Attorney General Barr, has simply said he won't do that. He's not given a reason why he won't do it. He's not given a reason why he's breaking precedent and refusing to support what will be our application for the grand jury information. He has not said he'll oppose it, but he's said either they will oppose it or not, or take no position. But in every previous case, the Attorney General has joined the committee in requesting the release of that grand jury committee information. It's always been granted to the committee, and the committee has handled it responsibly. It hasn't leaked, and it's been used properly.
Guys, only
Timeline on that?
questions.
No.
Will you issue a subpoena for when will you issue a subpoena for the other 4 former White House officials, including Hope Hicks?
When it seems most advisable to do
Are you
so.
concerned, though, that this move to invoke executive privilege will essentially be a chilling effect for...
Of course we're concerned. We're concerned that the President's declaration and the apparent intention to deny all information is going to be a chilling effect or more. Remember, in every case that people have talked about, whether it be former Attorney General Holder or last year when this committee under Republican control demanded all sorts of grand jury information and FBI interviews and all sorts of things, and we're given 880,000 pages. In every situation, there's been an accommodation, and there's been more or less information given. This year, we have gotten not one page of information in response to any subpoena, nor have any other committees in the House. There have been absolutely not one single page has been given. A total stonewalling of Congress, a total stonewalling of the American people, and that is an assertion of tyrannical power by the president, and it cannot be allowed to stand. The American people have to have a government responsive to them, and that means the president and the Congress.
So do you see this as a fact gathering toward impeachment, or as a whole distinct matter?
I see this as a fact gathering, which may or may not lead to. I mean, as I've said many times, we need the facts. We need all the information, and decisions like that or other things will be made down the road when we have the facts.
If you can't get the facts, how are you going to proceed?
We are going to have to insist on getting the facts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.